Good afternoon. I am sorry that I have to interrupt the wonderful conversations that I'm sure are going on. I know one of the greatest outcomes of this conference is some of the networking that happens. As much as I hate to interrupt that, we do have some things that we want to do during lunch, including a great speaker coming up. I'm Jennifer Dill, Director of OTREC. I hope you've been enjoying your lunch, and we're going to start the luncheon program. I want to thank our partner agencies and organizations for their role in bringing you today's program. So our partners in this are the Portland chapter of the Women's Transportation Seminar, the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association, and the Oregon section of the Institute for Transportation Engineers. I'd like to recognize the members of the Planning Committee. If you could please stand when I call your name. We have Pam O'Brien of Oregon ITE with DKS Associates, Christy Gladhill of WTS Portland with Oregon DOT and PSU alum. We have John Mackler of Oregon APA with Oregon DOT, formerly with OTREC, and played a huge role in designing the program. And Susan Pythman with OTREC. So thank you, and give them a round of applause. I also want to thank some of the key staff from OTREC. I'm sure you met them when you registered. Renata Turta, John MacArthur, Margaret Sanger, Lacey Friedley, Hal Hagedorn, and Carol Wallace. Thank you very much again for your work. So I hope you've enjoyed the morning sessions, and I'd like to thank all the speakers and moderators for their efforts on that. Now I'm pleased to announce the winners of this year's OTREC Awards, given to the people and organizations whose contributions put them at the forefront of transportation innovation. First of all, we have our Researcher of the Year. This year's Researcher of the Year is Professor Kelly Clifton. Kelly is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Portland State University and one of our core researchers, having been the lead investigator on 7 projects for OTREC and the NHTSA program. Her work is having an impact on practice in many ways. Most recently, her work demonstrating that auto trip generation rates are lower in mixed-use urban contexts will show up in the forthcoming ITE Trip Generation Handbook. Please give a round of applause for our Researcher of the Year. Kelly, stand up. Thank you. So also at the summit each year, we honor a Partner of the Year, an organization who has joined with OTREC to generate research ideas, fund research, and implement research results. We can't do what we do without partnerships, and it's been a part of OTREC from the beginning. By far, our biggest partners over the course of the grant have been our member universities. The support they've given to OTREC programs has made possible all of our innovations and the collaboration between the 4 universities that has come to define not just the OTREC grant, but transportation research in Oregon broadly. Please join me in recognizing Portland State University, University of Oregon, Oregon State University, and Oregon Tech. Thank you. So our third and final award to present is the Congressman Peter DeFazio Transportation Hall of Fame Award. This special award goes to an Oregonian whose leadership reflects Representative DeFazio's values and advances OTREC's theme. And there is no better fit for this award than OTREC's founding director, Dr. Robert Bertini. For his relatively short time in Oregon, few people changed the state's transportation research and education landscape more than Rob Bertini. Arriving at Portland State University in the year 2000, he quickly elevated transportation to a position it had never occupied within the university, creating a transportation engineering graduate program, developing 6 new courses, and founding the Intelligent Transportation Systems Lab. He established the Friday Transportation Seminar Series, which I'm guessing many of you have have either been in person or watched on the web. His vision and tenacity helped Oregon land its own University Transportation Center, OTREC, in 2006, instantly raising the profile of transportation research on the 4 campuses. His efforts drew wider attention, landing him an NSF Career Award, which he devoted to creating Portal, the region's transportation data archive. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Research and Innovative Technology Administration recognized Bertini's continuing accomplishments, selecting him as its deputy administrator, where he served for 2 years, returning to PSU in 2011. Just this month, Rob began a new position as a professor at his alma mater at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where we know he'll have a great impact. Because of his new position, Rob couldn't be on hand today, but he sent a video accepting the award.
Thank you very much, especially to the OTREC Executive Committee for this wonderful award. It's a great honor and quite humbling to receive the Peter DeFazio Transportation Hall of Fame Award. This award was designed to honor Congressman DeFazio, who was instrumental in establishing OTREC as a statewide transportation center and who is deeply committed to sustainable transportation solutions. It's also humbling to be in the company of such rock stars who received this award in past years. Dick Feeney, Stefano Vigiano, Gail Achterman, Andy Catugno, and Bruce Starr have all strongly supported the creation of a collaborative transportation research and education center in Oregon. This award should really be shared with all of the incredible students who helped make OTREC look good through their research, education, and professional achievements. They really are the transportation leaders of tomorrow. And it's especially fitting that Professor Roger Lindgren, the first PhD student from the PSU Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, is physically accepting the award today. It's also important to look back and acknowledge the history of transportation research and education at PSU. Professors Kenneth Duker and Walter Kramer worked hard to build the foundation for OTREC at Portland State. The late Dean Nohad Tulan passionately believed in the need for a cross-disciplinary approach for research and education. This award should also be shared with excellent colleagues and supporters, especially Jenny Kincaid, Hal Hagedorn, Carol Wallace, Bill Fireherm, Alan Kolababa, and Tina Frost, who all helped get OTREC off the ground. Transportation agency colleagues have also made it a pleasure to work on applied research. Early on, Dennis Mitchell from ODOT, Bill Close from the City of Portland, and Ken Turner from TriMet stepped forward and offered data and a collaborative spirit that continues today. This award is also shared with the late Debbie Murdoch, who led the effort to engage with elected officials and transportation agency and industry leaders who believed that a statewide, unbiased, collaborative transportation center could serve as the transportation research arm for Oregon. OTREC has made great progress under the leadership of Professor Jennifer Dill, and I wish you many more years of success. With all of today's exciting changes and huge challenges, I know that OTREC will continue to be at the forefront of innovative and collaborative multimodal transportation research and education. Have a great summit.
Thank you. So, as Rob mentioned, Professor Roger Lindgren, OTREC's Executive Committee member from Oregon Tech, will accept this award on Rob's behalf.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I just want to say a couple of words. First of all, it's a great honor to be here at this OTS event, and it's really just something very special to be asked to accept this on behalf of my friend and mentor, Rob Bertini. Rob made a profound and lasting impact on my life, as well as the lives of many, many students over the years. whether it was introducing freshmen to the concept of what transportation was like and how it was involved in engineering, all the way through to all the masters and PhD candidates that Rob worked with. Jennifer, thank you and the rest of the OTREC Executive Committee for choosing such an outstanding recipient for this year's DeFazio Award. And Rob, because you're going to be watching on video like we watched you, on behalf of all of your students, I just want to thank you for the profound way that you have challenged and motivated the next generation of transportation professionals. Thank you.
All right. So congratulations to all of our award winners. Now we're pleased to have with us our keynote speaker, Jarrett Walker. Walker provided planners and community members with a new way to think about the choices transit planning requires with his 2011 book, Human Transit. As a transit consultant, Walker challenges transportation decision makers to be aware of what voices are missing from their discussions. He helps planners identify their agency's core values and to make the choices that reflect those values. Walker grew up here in Portland and serves here as the president of Jarrett Walker and Associates, and in Australia and New Zealand as principal consultant with the MRC agency MR Cagney Consultants. He holds a PhD in Theater Arts and Humanities from Stanford and points out on his blog that he is probably the only person with peer-reviewed publications in both the Journal of Transport Geography and Shakespeare Quarterly. Please welcome Jarrett Walker.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful audience. Such an honor to be invited to come chat with you a little bit today. So as Jennifer has already informed you, my resume is a complete train wreck. There is no way to tell a linear story about how ever since I was an undergraduate I have been moving in a logical path toward where I am. My resume is more like a series of circles that sort of grow over here and look completely unrelated, and then suddenly when you're in your 50s they intersect in the way that you didn't expect and start combining into something that you could not possibly have envisioned. That's why I tend to be very encouraging of people who have non-traditional resumes. Over the course of this talk, I hope I will leave you with a little bit of a sense of why sooner or later a great institute of transportation policy might want to actually include a literature scholar. So first, there's a little bit of, you know how at the beginning of a video, this advertisement will end in 10 seconds. On October 2nd and 3rd, I'm teaching here in Portland down at TriMet, where it's hosting it, a 2-day intensive course in transit network design. It's a load of fun. Everybody who does it has a great time and learns a lot. And it's actually not for people who are going to do network design for a living. It's for people who are going to be adjacent to them in land use planning or transportation policy and who need to understand what's going on in the bedrock of the spatial dimension of transit. Also, if you haven't picked up my book, on the table in the far back there are flyers that will give you a discount on it if you do whatever it says. Some code you enter or something like that. So, epistemology. In philosophy, the term epistemology refers to the study of how we know things. In other words, the study of certainty. And one of the most basic models that I always find very useful to start with in organizing my thoughts about almost anything is this idea that there's a spectrum of different kinds of certainty. All the way from, at the very bottom, what we might call cold certainty. Certainties about things like geometry and math, which don't get us very excited, but on the other hand, we can really take them to the bank. They're even true on other planets. Up through statements about physics, statements about biology, where suddenly our sphere of reference has collapsed from the entire universe down to the one planet where we know something about biology, down to the social sciences, and now we're mostly talking about just one species, down to the domain of culture and aesthetics. Where people start making generalizations about why people make choices and what it takes to motivate people and so on. And that's about as far as you can go and still have something that you can dress up, you can present as an academic discipline. But if you go further in that direction, obviously, in the direction of greater subjectivity, you come to the certainties we all have about the feelings of our own in-group. But ultimately, we all know that the hottest kind of certainty, the thing about which we are most certain, is our own feelings and sensations. And so we have this spectrum from cold certainty to hot certainty, and there are absolutely opposite kinds of certainty. The thing that we are most sure of, in fact, the great literary critic Elaine Scarry, in a book called The Body in Pain, argued that the ultimate bedrock of certainty, the thing that we are referring to metaphorically when we talk about our certainty about anything else, is the sensation of physical pain. That my head hurt, I have a headache, is the most certain statement we will ever make. And that everything else is kind of relative to that and distances from that. And yet at this opposite extreme, those of us who've taken the time to learn some math understand that there are some other kinds of certainty, definitional certainties, that we can also count on, although they could not be more completely opposite in how they feel or how they work. So as we worry a lot about silos, and we go to lots of meetings about interdisciplinariness, and those of you in academia do more of it than I do, but I deal with it a lot when I'm out having some conversation in a professional setting, and I'm hearing the different frames of reference that people are coming from. And it made me ask this question. Linguists have a great time going around the world studying various languages and studying the ways that different languages require you to be specific about different things. So that often when you translate something into another language, you have to say something that you didn't say in the original language because that language forces you to say it. What if our language, what if in every sentence we had to say began with a little word that signaled which kind of certainty we are about to express? That signaled whether I know this mathematically, or whether I know this as a sort of social science conclusion, whether I know this as the basis of a series of correlations, that I have a particular R squared for this, if you will? What if I know this as a matter of culture or aesthetics? Like what if I'm talking about beauty and that this or that is beautiful, but I'm saying it from a standpoint of, no, this or that is sort of understood culturally to be beautiful, it's not just my personal feeling. What if there were another word we had to say at the beginning of a sentence which meant, these are just my feelings, this is what I feel right now? Think about how many fights would never get started. And think about all of the ways that communication would be clearer if, for example, whenever I say something about a fact about how transit works, I marked with that sentence that I am stating a mathematical fact, if I am, or an empirical fact that essentially is a bunch of correlations, or whether I'm just stating my personal feelings. Because one of our problems in the transit industry is because there is so little understanding that there is this bedrock set of expertise, what I call network design or network geometry, things I say about that are easily mistaken for opinions when they're not. They're actually descriptions of mathematical facts. And I'll come back to that. So now I want to throw you one other big highfalutin philosophical concept. This one's out of psychology. And it's an observation that in general, human beings, the simplest way to put this is human beings tend, as a rule, to overestimate the rationality of their own choices and underestimate the rationality of other people's choices. And that's one of those things where there's lots of psychological studies behind this. The work has been done, but what's more, most of us can actually just interrogate our own feelings and understand that they have our number on this one. This feeling that my actions are down near the bottom. I am rationally responding to my situation when I make decisions like mode choice about how to travel, right? But those people over there, their actions are really weird. It must be their psychology and culture because I can't understand why else they would do that, right? And what we're being cautioned about here is let's compensate for the error by saying, wait a minute, maybe those people who are behaving strangely are not just expressing their personalities. Maybe what they're doing is acting rationally in a situation that I don't entirely understand because I'm not them. I'm not in their situation. You start listening to the way people talk about transit, the way people categorize transit customers, and this is going on everywhere. And I encourage you to just listen for it from this point of view. This notion that, yes, I'm perfectly rational, but think about how much of what comes up in the marketing space. The folks who want to, for example, do market segmentation and tell us that we have 75 different kinds of customers and that they're all in these categories, and here's how they behave because of their personality or culture. Is that necessary? Or, in fact, would you correct for it by saying, let's first of all lean in the direction of assuming that maybe the behavior of others is actually a rational response to their situation, and consider cultural or psychological explanations for that behavior only if it can't be explained as a rational response to their situation. It's much like taking the position that the evolutionary biologist says when people start talking to him about God. That's all very well, but I can explain a whole lot without going there. And there's so much that we can explain without that hypothesis. Why do we go to that hypothesis so quickly when we have such an effective explanation at the level of just how things seem to be working? And as somebody who has spent 22 years now working as a transit planning consultant, going to city after city, getting engaged in their conversation, one of the things that I realize I bring as a humanities scholar is a bit of an ability to analyze incomprehension and analyze confusion, because that's what literary scholars do. You could say that you can define it many ways, but one of the ways to define the literary humanities is it's the study of incomprehension, and the understanding of how communication happens and fails, and why we have all of this literature that tells us certain stories over and over again. But this is transit's problem in the U.S. Very few people in the U.S. actually understand the math of how transit becomes a rational choice for people in their situation. There's math there, and I'll talk a little bit about it. As a result, they tend to seek cultural, psychological, or aesthetic explanations for everything when we don't actually have to go there in many cases. Now, some of this, of course, is the result of silo effects. So, sure, I agree with almost everyone that the aesthetic dimension of transit is extremely important, that things need to look and feel civilized and so on. But we also have to recognize that everyone, me included, when you listen to anybody's speech, you have to have in the back of your mind remembering, okay, what's the nature of the food chain that this person is in? Where is their income ultimately coming from? Follow the money, as folks say, right? And so a profession that has grown around the selling of expensive real estate is going to be focused somewhat, is going to inevitably not be particularly attuned to the rational decisions that extremely low-income people make, because it's just not the market. It's not in the center of that conversation. It tends to be over here in a part of the conversation where at 4 p.m. we'll worry about inequality. So we have this, so that many people in the conversation are wanting to make it all aesthetic, wanting to say, no, it's about the look of the buses, it's about you need streetcars instead of buses, it's about nicer bus shelters, it's about all that. I'm going to contend that there isn't really a lot that we need that to explain, because so much is explained by sheer usefulness and by the way people are making remarkably reasonable choices in the context of their options. So let me give you this simple example of how this all works. We've all heard that LA is a car culture, that Los Angeles is a car culture, that people down there love their cars. And I've spent enough time in Los Angeles, and I've listened to enough people in Los Angeles, and I've followed the conversation in that city, and it's pretty clear that no, that's not an explanation we need. Everybody is driving in Los Angeles because in their situation, given the city as it is built, given the transit options as they are now, that is the logical thing to do. So you don't need to go to Los Angeles as a car culture. In fact, when you define the problem as cultural, you make it sound impossible, right? How are we going to change people's culture? No, what we can do is change people's options. And we can come back down to the practical task of actually giving people the options that work. So I've been thinking a lot about how to visualize this, because, and not very long ago, I was confronted with a new graphical tool. A company called Conveil produces this tool, and my firm works with them quite a bit. And And it's the simplest idea, but Conveyal didn't invent this. This is an isochrone map. In other words, plunk down my pointer on a map, and these blobs tell me where I could get to in 15, 30, or 45 minutes. That's blue, green, and pink. 15, 30, and 45 minutes. Now, we've all seen those isochrone maps. Something very like this is hiding inside of most transportation models. But only recently have we started thinking about the possibility that, wait, maybe this is the outcome we should be talking about. Anyone who's done transportation planning, transportation engineering has had the experience of talking about travel time and talking about travel time this and travel time that, and outside of our box, it sounds like a kind of vague and geeky conversation, and we're somehow not connecting with what people care about. Well, this is just travel time flipped inside out. Instead of asking, how long will it take me to get to my job, we ask, where could I go? That's what this map is. Where could I go? And suddenly, we're talking about something that's much more important than transportation. We're talking about freedom. We're talking about the barest sensation of liberty, because when we think about liberty, what's the first line of Marx's Communist Manifesto? Man was born free and he is everywhere in chains. When we think about liberty, the opposite of liberty is physical immobility. Physical inability to move. The core metaphor that underlies our sensation of liberty is the ability to move, the ability to travel, the ability to go places. This is a map of that. The cohorts are actually very interesting because the 15-minute distance, everyone understands, that's an errand distance. 15 minutes, I could go to lunch, I could go on an errand in that amount of time. The 30-minute distance, 30 minutes each way, is Marchetti's constant, which is a pretty rough, we can have lots of arguments about Marchetti's constant, but is a broad notion of the kind of time that most people are willing to spend commuting. So your job could be in the green zone if this is your house. And the pink zone, 45 minutes, you can deal with your house of worship being that distance. You can deal with the elderly relative that you visit once a week being that distance. So one of the great things that this does, of course, is it starts to help people, it starts to dawn on people that they need to take responsibility for the consequences of their location choice, which is why this tool needs to be in every single real estate listing. Every time you look up any kind of real estate, there should be a pointer to this tool so that you will have no illusions about where you will be able to get to easily. And obviously there'd be a tool for cars, and then there'd be this tool, and maybe there'd be another tool for bikes. Because transit agencies have an enormous problem with the business that moves from a downtown office building out to a business park by the airport and then calls up and says, hey, we had great transit, what went wrong? This actually happens. This is what transit agencies do. So, of course, the other consequence is that you can move your blob around and you can see the consequences. So, for example, my firm is about to outgrow my house. I'm going to have to get an office. And I can look here and say, okay, I could spend extra to have my office right in downtown Portland, and that is where my employees could live and get to me. So I understand I'm making a decision about the workforce for which I can compete in my business. I could spend a little less and be out in the middle of the East Side grid, maybe in Hollywood, and that would be my blob. Now, the beautiful thing about this, you can run the numbers on this and say what percentage of the jobs and population and opportunities are in this blob. We can do that sort of high-level analysis. But the other wonderful thing about this tool is that me, sitting at home in my pajamas as an ordinary person, can look at this and think not just how big is the blob, but more importantly, does this blob contain what matters to me? So I can look at this and say, you know, if I locate in Hollywood, well, I don't have nearly as good access to Washington County, but you know what? Is it likely that the people who are going to want to work for me live in Washington County? Or are they more likely to live somewhere in there? Well, I worry a little bit about losing St. John. So I can have that conversation with myself. I can move the pointer around and I can think about what the ideal place is, fully cognizant of what the opportunities are. And by the way, the other thing that Conveyal is trying to do with this is to create a product such that next time you're having a debate in your community about whether to introduce a new transit service or introduce a new increment of transit service or create a new light rail line or whatever, you can go home and in your pajamas, you can bring up two versions of this tool, one for the city as it is now and one for how it would be after that change has occurred. and you can see how it affects your personal isochrones, and you can make an extremely selfish decision about whether this benefits you. And I think we can even imagine that if you actually crowdsourced everyone's feedback that was actually informed by that, where they actually knew what this thing was going to do for them, which we almost never really do in our public communications about transit projects, then the crowdsourced response might look very much like wisdom, because it would ultimately get, via people's own consciousness, with everyone's citizen participation, we would essentially be creating a computer that is very much like what we do in transportation models, except that everyone would have participated in it. And everyone would have made an informed choice based on how this actually affects their lives. This is powerful stuff. And of course, it's a tool for personal responsibility. I can choose to locate in a leafy cul-de-sac in the Southwest, and those will be my options. So the other thing this does, when I first saw this diagram, my realization, something clicked for me. It was like, this is what I've been trying to do for the last 22 years and haven't had the image to explain. This is why I have pushed back when people have said, you need separate services for different kinds of people because these people won't ride with those people. This is why I have pushed back when people said, we don't need more bus service, we just need really nice streetcars stuck in traffic that will look nice in front of our developments. This is why I have pushed back in the face of all of these other non-transit, non-access agendas that everyone is bringing to the transit conversation. Because all I have been trying to do in my career is grow these blobs for people. I've wanted people to have more liberty. And so what we're talking about here is when you ask a geeky access question like what percentage of the city's jobs, nightclubs, parks, potential friends, et cetera, can I get to in the next 15 minutes? What we're really saying is how much of the city in all its richness is available to me. You can go right back to Jane Jacobs and understand this fundamental definition of the city as opposed to the village, which is that a city has lots of people and therefore there are people who are interested in everything. And if you want to have a Ukrainian nudist pinnacle club, there are 3 other people in the city who are actually interested in that, and you can find them, and if they're in your blobs, you can actually get together for a pinnacle party, right? Whatever it is. And of course, that's exactly how 3 people who have the same idea for an app get together and start the next brilliant tech company. It's the same process. It lies in access. So when I talk about abundant access, and this is probably the title of my next book, what I mean is as many people as possible, able to reach as many destinations as possible as quickly as possible. But, and we usually stop there, right? We're talking about travel time. It still sounds too geeky. No, not for its own sake, but for this reason. So that they have as many real choices and opportunities as possible and are therefore free. And I mean freedom in exactly the sense that the Constitution means freedom. I mean, and if you interrogate what the sensation of freedom is, I think you'll find that these line up. And let's just notice, when all of us who work in all of the wonderful work we do, trying to make our society and our communities better, we're taught that we should have this trinity of types of evaluation criteria, right? There are the economic criteria, there are the social criteria, and the environmental or sustainability criteria. And all 3 of those criteria are still working within a framework that says, basically we're talking about a designed society. We're talking about a society where if we provide these incentives and these kinds of choices occur, these kinds of outcomes occur. It is something that these outcomes flow through from what we imagine about our society and how we arrange it and what kinds of possibilities we provide on through to outcomes. But none of those 3 criteria include this key missing variable, which is key missing outcome, which is the personal sensation of liberty. And I spend enough time in red states, and I spend enough time talking with conservatives about this stuff, that I've realized how important this is. Because as soon as we talk just in the language of outcomes, just in the language of what follows as a societal outcome from various actions of government, we have lost half of our audience, and a lot of that audience is actually perfectly capable of understanding this. I was chatting last night with Keith Bartholomew from the University of Utah. One of the great stories of Utah, after all, is that if there are no liberals, conservatives figure it all out for themselves. And so and so they certainly can, right? And and the entire conversation can happen in the context of a fundamental value on liberty and prosperity, things that are not particularly left-wing ideas. Now, the cool thing about abundant access is that it is this big and extremely visceral thing, and yet we can describe it mathematically. Mathematically, down at the bottom of that hierarchy, transit access is made of walking and sometimes cycling, plus a network designed to optimize those 6 variables. There's a set of mathematical relationships between those variables that explain how those things go to create the largest possible blobs of liberty for people. That's all math. Now, in case you think I'm saying this is all huge books full of equations, no. You can actually explain it very patiently as though on a napkin with geometric drawings, which is what basically my book is doing. What I do in my book is talk through this in a very friendly way with no equations, but I'm talking at that geometric level. See why this is geometrically obvious so that you believe it as at that level of certainty rather than just at the level of certainty we have about social science outcomes like correlations. And then you know that this is true on other planets. Right? That's what it means to say that this is a mathematical fact. There's an old piece on my blog, you can Google it, called How Universal is Transit's Geometry? And it's a little thought experiment about an alien civilization on an alien planet trying to determine how few things I have to assume about this civilization in order to reach the conclusion that not only do they have something like transit, but that these relationship among those 6 variables is exactly what it is here, and that the way that it produces access for them is exactly the same. This is all spatial geometry. So one of the other things that's been happening along these lines is the ability to talk about frequent networks. Now, we have to remember that in America, the conversation about transit, once we get out of, enclave cities like Portland, the municipal conversation about transit is dominated by people who are motorists. And the fundamental problem, that doesn't make them evil, but it does mean they don't necessarily have the right metaphors. Because there are certain things about transit, think about those variables again. It's not too hard to explain speed, reliability, or capacity to a motorist because they have those concepts in the road and car world. But frequency. I sometimes have had to say to a suburban motorist, imagine there's a gate at the end of your driveway that only opens once an hour. Oh, so I don't need the highway to be faster. I need this gate to open more often. There you go. That's frequency. You got it. It is so hard. We have struggles inside, transit planners and transit agencies struggle often against transit marketing departments who don't get this and don't really want to market the fundamental mathematical details of how their service is actually liberating people. But one of Portland's great exports, and one of the great ideas that started here actually in the late 90s, was frequent network branding. Portland's TriMet produced a map of just the high-frequency routes, where high frequency means every 15 minutes all day, 7 days a week. In other words, service that's basically always coming. And what that means, the taglines, turn up and go, the wait is over, a network for people in a hurry. The relevance of that is obvious to a huge number of people who are open to using transit but who are not going to wait very long. And so the idea is basically you draw a map of just that, and you really emphasize that. And I've been one of the evangelists going around the country taking these ideas to Vancouver, Spokane, Los Angeles, and we're starting to see a lot of this kind of branding now. We're starting to talk about the layer of service that's useful to people who don't have much time. Here's another important piece of math, the genius of the grid. It's a mathematical fact that we can explain in those terms that a transit system that is trying to serve an area where people are going to and from lots of different places, not just one downtown, to and from lots of different places, is going to evolve a grid pattern, or at least that's the mathematical answer to providing the greatest access for the greatest number of people in that environment. Now, if you're LA or Chicago and you already have a grid pattern in your streets, this kind of comes naturally. But what's interesting is how even cities as ungridded as San Francisco, say, have, and I talk in my book through some examples of San Francisco where you'll watch a bus line leave this side of town and struggle against the street network to stay on the same line of latitude as it's forced this way. As it gets all the way over and ends at the other side of the city on the same line of latitude. It's trying to participate in a regular grid. The genius of the grid is this: we don't pick favorites. Transportation planners stop having conversations about who's more important than who else. City councils love this when you present it to them because they are tired of having conversations about whose district goes first. From absolutely any point A to absolutely any point B, close your eyes and point at the map. It doesn't matter where. The way you get there is to walk, wait very briefly because the service is frequent, then ride, get off, wait very briefly because the service is frequent, get on another service, ride, get off, and walk a short distance. That's how you get from anywhere to anywhere. Don't let anyone tell you that Portland's first great transit export was our initial light rail line. That opened in 1986, but in 1982, we opened the East Side Grid. We built the big grid pattern of transit lines all over the dense gridded part of Portland, which includes the whole East Side. And studies have shown, and if you think about this, you should understand it, that when we later ran a light rail line through the middle of that grid, the fact that the grid was there first was absolutely crucial to light rail line success, because it meant that the light rail line was not just serving its stations, it was also serving everywhere up and down, all the way across the grid that you could get to from each of those stations. The grid was there first, and the light rail built upon it. And of course, when we bring it back to the whole shape of aesthetic conversations and the folks who want all the conversations about transit to be fundamentally aesthetic, this is a real good way to concentrate the mind. Because you can, once you have this tool, there'll be a place where you can say, I don't ride buses, click this box. And of course, your blobs will get smaller. You'll have less freedom. There'll be fewer places you can go. That is always how it will be. Buses will always go more places than rail does. So that will always be the case. So then you can decide, are your aesthetic tastes and cultural attitudes worth shrinking your range of freedom? Absolutely your choice if you want to decide that, but it really puts the aesthetic conversation in the correct context of the situation in which decisions actually occur. But this is also quantitative, meaning dull, right? Cold. It's down at the bottom of this hierarchy. Quality is better than quantity, isn't it? How's that for a truism? Who can disagree with that? And, I thought what mattered was design. Design, right? Well, turns out quantity matters a lot. Ask a Canadian. One of the things I love about Canada is that it is kind of like there's another country with another approach to things in the same landscape with the same economy, right? Almost every North American city, at least in the north half, of the U.S., almost every city, every cultural part of the U.S. has a Canadian doppelganger. You can go across the 49th parallel and see something that's pretty darn similar in terms of how the economy works, really how the culture works, how the value, the nature of the landscape, and so on. So when we look at this outcome, relevance. That's what I call ridership per capita. Ridership per capita. In other words, just how deeply is the transit system penetrating the life of the city? How much of the population's using it? How essential is it in everybody's daily experience? And you see a bunch of Canadian cities on the left and a bunch of American cities on the right. These data, unfortunately, is from before the worst of Portland service cuts, so Portland's not doing that well now. But still, that's basically the shape. And the pattern you should see, of course, whoa. More than twice as high, comparing awfully comparable cities. Compare Calgary to Salt Lake, compare Edmonton to Salt Lake, compare Vancouver to Portland. Awfully similar situations, dramatically more relevance. Okay, well remember, what if we started by trying to explain this in terms of the obvious before we go to the cultural? Is this because Canada has more mixed traffic streetcars? No, they haven't built a single one. Is it because shelters are cuter? Is it because buses are nicer? Is it because the whole experience is nicer? No, it's not. It looks just about like ours. There's just more of it. So this is investment, service hours per capita, fundamentally just quantitatively, how much transit is there out there? That's the curve. Now, how's that for a correlation? There's really very little else that needs to be explained here, is there? There's really very little else that you have to go to the cultural factors to explain. Canadians run a whole lot more transit service than we do. As a result, a whole lot more people ride it. That's where the thought process goes of saying, let's start by just assuming that this is like people making rational choices in the context of their options. People have twice as much transit, they use it twice as much. Who knew? We really don't need to go to more complicated explanations than that. So what I love about Canada, and I love working across the border apart from the tax issues, Canadian transit achieves more because of sheer quantity. That is the only fundamental difference. Because more people ride it, more people understand how it works. So there is this secondary payoff. More people, more influential people in the society are likely to actually be riding transit, or their spouses at least ride transit and they talk about it over dinner. They get some basic notion of how transit works. I don't have to use the metaphor of imagine there were a gate on your driveway. So Canadian conversations are just a little more informed about how transit works, and as a result, the investments that they make are more likely to improve your actual ability to get somewhere. So just to wrap up my final unit here, I just want to talk a second about one other important kind of linguistic awareness that really needs to be in the front of our minds, especially if we're doing any kind of analytic work. It is the nature of analysis. It's almost in the nature of it. It makes us chop things up into boxes and talk about how this box is different from that box. So let's talk about these two boxes. Have we all heard about the idea of the choice rider? Years ago, I was presenting a plan I had done to a transit agency in suburban Southern California. And the board was a bunch of city councilmen from a bunch of different suburbs being served. And a board member from one of the more wealthy suburbs leaned forward and said, "Now, Mr. Walker, if we adopt this plan of yours, will that make me leave my BMW in the driveway?" And I'm not sure what I said, but we know what the answer is, I think, which is no, sir. It's not just that you have BMW, but if your BMW is so important to you that you needed us all to know that right now, then you're probably going to drive your BMW. But you know what? Congratulations, but you're a city councilman. That means you're part of an elite. And what we always have, and everyone who is in an elite, no matter how gloriously they have earned their status in society, you have to remember that part of being an elite is that there are not very many of you. Which means that if we are planning for mass transit and we are planning for the actual functionality of our cities, the experience and tastes of people who are in elite positions in society are actually a really lousy guide to what to do. And when we think about the whole problem of inequality or of the sort of collapse of the middle class, when we watch the way conversations may be moving in the direction of increasingly being made in small rooms where people around the table are mostly wealthy, you can see the danger. Because everyone likes to believe that, that they have some sort of instinct about how everyone else makes decisions. What they're really just doing is assuming that everyone else is like them. It's very dangerous. So the thing about this binarism, at the other end so we have this box of people who are supposedly choice riders and who we supposedly should be caring about competing for. And at the other end, we have a group of people that we call transit dependents. And I'll sometimes tell people, you know, when transportation planners get together in a room, in a private room, and they think nobody else is listening, they don't just call you transit dependents, they call you captive riders. Captives, like we have them in the dungeon. Like we don't have to worry about these people at all, is how that sounds, of course. Those people are stuck with us. Why should we care about their experience? We need to build fancy transit to attract the choice rider. That's where that goes, isn't it? And by the way, I want to call out that right here at PSU, there's excellent work being done. I heard a great pre-paper from Lisa Bates for PSU. I know Jennifer Dill's thinking about this. breaking up and complicating the concept of transit dependence and doing the technical work underlying that. But I can describe this in terms of the math of transit. In reality, like everything else, this is a spectrum. And the linguist's or philosopher's observation is, please notice that it is the nature of our language that it is hard for us to think about a spectrum, but easy for us to think about a pair of boxes. It's easy for us to think about a category of people called choice riders, a category of unfortunate people called transit dependents. It is actually hard for us to talk about the spectrum where everyone is along this spectrum anywhere in between them. Our language isn't suited for that. Our language is intrinsically polarizing in the sense that it makes it hard to see and talk about the middle. The old Texas Democrat Jim Hightower had that line, "There's nobody in the middle of the road except dead armadillos." But in fact, transit succeeds. You understand how transit succeeds only when the spectrum becomes visible. Because what actually happens, the reason why ordinary quantitative improvements in bus service attract so much ridership is that people are in all different situations with all different options along this spectrum, and when we improve somebody, when we expand people's blobs a little bit so that their life suddenly becomes possible, they sell their car and start riding. And it's the fact that there are people at every different point, which means that each individual increment of improvement generates more ridership, and likewise, when we cut ordinary bus service, we see ridership losses. So this is how it actually works. It builds upward toward a network that is useful to more and more fortunate people, and finally to the point where we have a network where people who are really quite fortunate, like myself, I took the bus here this morning, I'm going to take the bus to the doctor afterward, can use the transit system even though they're extremely busy. So I want to end with a little rumination on who are these people? Are they unfortunate folks in need of compassion? Are they people whose rights are being denied? Those are the two frames in which, on the left, I generally hear them described. Neither of them is quite right. Then, when I go to any number of cities in red states, what I'm told in no uncertain terms is these other four things. Threats to my property values. Some of you may know I've been involved in rolling out probably the most transformative bus network restructuring that we're going to see in this country in a long time. It's in Houston, Texas. We're going to triple the amount of frequent transit service in the city. We're going to connect 1 million more people to 1 million more jobs, and we're not adding a single dollar to the operating budget. In our outreach, the only great concentrations of negative feedback that we're getting are from a few wealthy, very wealthy areas where, because we need to get from here to there, we're going to go down this street through this area. And the letters we get from them say basically, you must not be aware that the average home value in our neighborhood is $700,000. I guess I was aware of that. The notion, in other words, since obviously transit destroys property values, we're obviously attacking them by running a bus near their house. Are they losers? Are they vagrants? Here's another story. There's a city somewhere between the Cascades and Appalachia where there's a good deal of controversy about a downtown transit center, which is currently located in a very convenient place in the center of town. Some people think it needs to be moved away, out of downtown, somewhere where we don't have to look at it, because there are all these vagrants around it. Well, a friend of mine who was in charge of planning in that agency took one of these business leaders who'd been pushing this line down to the transit and said, hey, let me show you something. Went down there, looked at the people sitting on the street at the transit center, and he said, and my friend asked, so what do you see in here? There are all these people sitting here. I mean, they look 50. I mean, my daughter wouldn't want to walk past this, right? And he says, okay, come here. He goes and shows them something inside. Brings them back 10 minutes later. Asks me again, so what are you seeing now? I says, well, it's all these. Wait a minute. They're not the same people. They're not the same people. Yes, those people all got on buses, and now these are new people. This is what transit is like. Yes. If you're going to have transit in your city, you're going to have to consider you're going to have to detach the image of person sitting on the street from your image of vagrant, right? Person sitting on the street is not necessarily a vagrant. They actually have not wrapped their heads around this yet. And so that's something we encounter. Are they criminals sooner or later? Somebody out there, please do a national survey on how many downtown transit centers are being built immediately adjacent to the county jail surrounded by bail bonds offices. I've encountered 3 just recently. All those attitudes are out there. I don't think any of these things are right. And in fact, there's a mathematical answer to this question, which arises from thinking about the way that the logic of transit causes its demand to gradually grow and upward from a base provided by the low-income rider who uses it even at a fairly low level of quality. That image, of course, is that what these people actually are pioneers. Pioneers in the sense that all those folks came out in covered wagons on the Oregon Trail only because Lewis and Clark had walked. And the only reason we can come out here and drive over Mount Hood in cars is because those people came over it in covered wagons. In other words, that the fact that we have as good a transit system as we have here in Portland today is inseparable from the fact that back in 1970, when we had a miserable transit system of old stinking buses that ran once an hour and all came downtown, some people were willing to ride that. That is how transit actually grows from the initiative of pioneers. And so one of the interesting sort of ways to break our assumptions apart about transit is to just remember that when you're in some other city where transit's not very good, and you see, a 60-year-old lady with 3 shopping bags standing in the rain next to a pole next to the ditch, she's not just unfortunate. She's not just facing injustice. She's also a pioneer. And the future of transit and everyone who values transit should be grateful for the fact that she was willing to do that before we made everything beautiful and everything abundant so that we would all use it. Thanks very much. I look forward to your questions. Are you going to field questions?
Sure, or I'll get it started. So we do have time for some questions, at least 10 or so minutes. So again, do we have the microphone? Yeah, there's at least one over there, and here's the one over there. So please head to a microphone or to the restroom. I'm seeing people get up. Okay. I see John Fink going to the microphone to get us started.
Thanks very much. That was a terrific talk, and you spoke about a lot of things that I think about riding the bus. I'm in the 45-minute zone from downtown, and I've been here 4 years, and I find riding the bus to be terrifically liberating just in terms of the time I have available to do stuff on my phone. And as does virtually everybody else who gets on the bus where I do out in Southwest. And I'm just surprised that people don't talk about that more. That, for the geeky generations, this is really a fantastic improvement over sitting in a car.
We have just begun to discover that. And again, so much of this is generational. But this is one of the main reasons why transit doesn't have to be faster than driving anymore, because of the quality of time. I hate having to drive into downtown, not just because of the hassles, but because I can get a lot done on the bus. And we haven't really begun to plumb that. The other thing to be watching together with that factor is all the information we're getting about the hazards of distracted driving, right? All the information we're getting about that. And the ultimate message of that is, if you're going to drive safely, you not only can't be doing this, you really shouldn't have it hands-free, you shouldn't be talking on the phone. You know what? Safe driving is just incredibly boring. It's got to be incredibly boring if you're doing it right. And as people start inferring that from what we're hearing about the actual dangers involved, that's going to make this option even more attractive, absolutely.
Thank you, Jared. A great presentation. I was struck a little bit by actually your presentation was sort of pitting transit against driving, and at least for me, travel behavior has become much more of a diverse set of choices. Sure. I could car to go at a given time, I could decide to walk, I could decide to drive, carpool with somebody. Can you speak a little bit to what other lessons might be learned just about the diversity of travel choices?
Sure. One of the most important things that you have to understand the math in order to get is that not everybody is going to have the same transportation options because they are a function of the location you've chosen. And one of the things that we're going to have to get over is this notion that, A, we people in the big city are trying to take away the cars of people in Damascus, right? That people in the outer suburbs are in danger of us coming and taking their cars. No. If you've chosen to live in Damascus, you are probably going to drive. And as long as you made that conscious choice when you chose to live there, that's great. That has to be great, because there are lots of landscapes in which driving is always going to be the only thing that really works well. And as long as people make that conscious decision when they choose where to locate, that's great. So there are lots of opportunities for us to disarm that critique by being much more open about the fact that transit is really tied to certain kinds of land use patterns. And also it comes to this whole hopeless issue about regional equity. You know, we in Damascus aren't getting our fair share. Well, that's because you're getting a whole lot more asphalt per capita, as we in the inner city need more transit per capita. It balances out in the bigger scheme of things. Yeah.
Hi, Jarrett.
Hey, Chris.
I embrace everything that you said today, but I want to talk about something you didn't talk about, which is the land use side of the equation.
Right.
One strategy is to grow the blobs. Another strategy is to cram more things inside the existing blobs.
Right.
And can you talk about the math of transit policy choices that influence the land use development inside the blobs?
Right. Let's imagine if land use development, I mean, developers like to think they do it, but actually it comes down to the choices of their customers. It comes down to everybody making choices about where they want to locate, right? Those are the people who are ultimately the customers for whatever development is getting built and who determine whether that development's going to pencil. So the point about that abundant access image, the point about those isochrones, the point about being able to play with this tool on every real estate listing, imagine if we had vastly more informed consumers who are vastly more informed about exactly how their liberty and opportunity would change if they made a particular location choice. This is scary. It's kind of crowdsourced, you know? It means that we have to let go of some of our certainty about the explanations for other people's behavior and instead give them the information, give them the kind of deep information that lets them actually be who they are and make their own choices, but informed choices. So I think that is actually the answer to much of the land use problem, that when we're developers and architects and new urbanists, we're inclined to think that it's our job to somehow make the market happen, when really the problem is that the market is so uninformed. And I think that the market and the support for enabling more people to live where transit access is good emerges naturally, and the political support emerges from that as people become much more aware of what the trade-offs are. Obvious example, it is right now still much too easy for a low-income person to look at housing prices and figure out they have to live on Northeast 130-something, right? Because that's where they can afford to live. Well, maybe it's not affordable if they actually look at what that's going to do to the range of opportunities that they're going to need in order to advance themselves. So I want to just take it there and think about sort of the opportunities to create a more informed customer base that ultimately will make the land use take care of itself. Sam.
Jarrett, hello. Thank you so much. How are you? This is a wonderful presentation. I want to ask you a difficult question because somebody has to. You talked about in one of your slides about the political elite, about a city councilor perhaps who has a great deal of wealth, and how that perspective might not enable that person to see objectively. I'm paraphrasing here. So my take of our city of Portland is that elites may indeed be relatively wealthy, but they're also come from a very narrow piece of the political spectrum. And elitism here is defined as much by the philosophy that you adopt when you govern as the wealth that you may or may not have. Right. What I'm really getting at here, to state this as a question instead of a sermon, is what advice would you like to give to to this city with respect to how it makes its transit decisions?
So I think we've been through a period when transit policy in the city was considered basically an adjunct of redevelopment policy, and where people actually went around saying, we're spending transit money on this, but it's not a transit project, it's a redevelopment project, as though it ever made sense for those to be opposites. And I think we have to be fair, you know, we believe in Oregon nice here, and we do a lot to sort of try to give ourselves the impression that we don't really disagree about anything. But you got to kind of follow the money and understand that, okay, a group of people who are going to make money off of a particular kind of development are going to have a particular set of priorities that ultimately goes to the food chain that they're in. And also the way that intellectual silos, such as, for example, aestheticism, the belief, which is the belief that all the great questions are aesthetic, which tends to go to saying that the problem with transit is just that it's not nice enough. That is also something that has a great pedigree in, I mean, I did a fine arts PhD. I lived in an aestheticist silo where we sat around in seminars and talked about beauty. So I understand where the design elites are coming from when they say that we should make it more beautiful. But what's missing is a little bit more awareness on everyone's part of how many people are actually at the table and how many interests actually bear on this, and sort of everybody's ability to also recognize why these other perspectives are there, why they're all important, why they fit together. If we can't do it in Oregon, I don't know who can, you know, because we are really still in this state so much less polarized, so much more capable of having intelligent conversations that bring people together on a large scale than a lot of places I've worked. So I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about it. But I think the other thing that I bring to that is don't forget that underneath all of this there are some actual geometric facts. And so one of the things that's missing, quite frankly, is that honestly, until very recently, and I have been pounding the table about this, it has not been understood that there is such a thing as an expertise in transit network design. That doesn't mean design of bridges, it doesn't mean design of infrastructures, it means design of networks. And I recently figured out I no longer call what I do service planning, I call it network design, because I need to claim the fact that there's an expertise there. But that doesn't mean you need to hire me. I'd much rather that you all just understood the sort of basic geometric set of facts that causes transit to work a certain way, regardless of what vehicle you use, regardless of how cute the shelters are, regardless of all those other things. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. We always pride ourselves on having a thought-provoking speaker at lunch, and Jarrett, you did a great job.